Drink this cup of wine. Don't blame your legitimate elder sister when you're on your way to the underworld. If you must blame anyone, blame the fact that you were born a concubine's daughter, with a life worth less than a blade of grass. The excruciating pain from the poison wine that had seared through my intestines in my past life still seemed to linger in my internal organs, burning my throat like a raging fire. I suddenly opened my eyes, gasping for breath, my undershirt soaked through with cold sweat. There was no pitch-black coffin in sight, only bright red double happiness characters and Dragon and Phoenix wedding candles. Stop wailing like you're at a funeral. The crown prince of the northern frontier may be gravely wounded and on the verge of death, but once you marry him, you'll be the crown princess, after all. If you don't marry in Jingru's place, do you expect her, the legitimate daughter, to become a widow? My stepmother, Madame Wang, pierced my eardrums with her sharp, caustic voice as she held a bowl of still-steaming poison in her hand, her eyes filled with venom. I've been reborn. I've returned to the day of my wedding as a stand-in bride. In my past life, I refused to marry at all costs, so this mother and daughter forced me to drink poison wine. As I lay dying, I heard my father coldly order, "Say she fell ill suddenly, have Jingru take her place, and keep the entire dowry." They trampled on my corpse and, with a clear conscience, pocketed the exorbitant dowry from the Marquis' mansion. This time, as I looked at Mrs. Wang's hypocritical face, I suppressed the hatred churning inside me and said calmly, "I'll marry him." Ms. Wang and her elder half-sister, Lin Jingru, who was standing beside her, were both taken aback, and the sedative they had been about to force down my throat froze midair. A hint of glee flashed across Lin Jingru's eyes, and she took a half-step back, as if afraid I might change my mind. "However, I have a condition," I said, looking Mrs. Wang straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering. "Return to me the jade hairpin my birth mother left behind. Once I wear it, I will obediently step into the wedding palanquin. Otherwise, if I throw myself against a pillar in front of the wedding procession, even the entire Lin family would not be able to bear the punishment of execution for the crime of deceiving the emperor and arranging a substitute bride." A flash of malice crossed Ms. Wang's eyes. But hearing the wedding gongs and drums already ringing out from outside, she weighed her options, pulled the hairpin from her sleeve, and hurled it viciously onto the table. "I'll give you credit for knowing your place. Hurry up and dress her in her wedding attire, and put the veil over her head." While Mrs. Wang and her daughter were out attending to the guests, I immediately summoned my trusted maid, Banksia, and instructed her in a low voice, "Go to the storeroom in the front courtyard. While there are so many people around today, copy down, item by item, the list of betrothal gifts sent by the Marquis' mansion, as well as the items our household has actually kept. Especially the military-grade cast iron stored in those black wooden crates. You must verify the quantities with absolute precision." In an effort to marry a daughter of the Lin family to ward off misfortune, the Marquis of Jinbei's household sent a dowry worth half their fortune. The Lin family, however, was insatiable. Not only did they demand a different bride, but they also pocketed most of the lavish gifts for themselves. As for those iron artifacts, they were Secretary Lin's best-kept secret. This debt is a noose around the Lin family's neck. Banksia was quick-witted. Before I left, she folded the copied bill into a thin roll and slipped it into the cuff of my wedding robe. As the red veil fell, I was helped into the wedding palanquin by the matchmaker, bound for the Marquis of the Northern Town's mansion. I neither wept nor resisted. The Lin family all believed I had accepted my fate, little knowing that I was on my way to find a sharp blade capable of wiping them all out. Rumors abound that the Marquis of Jinbei's household is a den of crude, reckless killers, and that the heir, Guyi, is severely injured, disabled, and has a violent temper. Lin Jingru was afraid she would suffer torment if she married into that family, which is why she refused outright. But when the wedding palanquin came to a stop in front of the Ho family mansion, there was neither the deafening crack of the ceremonial whip nor the servants' contemptuous whispers. I was led across the brazier. Though my view was obstructed by my veil, I heard the extremely rhythmic clanging of armor. Immediately afterward, 8 crisp, resonant male voices rang out in unison, full of vigor. "Greetings, sister-in-law. These are the 8 young masters of the Ho family." Far from looking down on me, the scapegoat sent by the Lin family, they instead paid me the most solemn military salute. Shortly afterward, the old Marquis's deep, commanding voice rang out from the main hall. "Young lady of the Lin family, now that you've entered the Gu household, you are one of us. As long as I am still alive, no one in this mansion will dare to wrong you in the slightest." I tightened my grip on Shipa's hand slightly, my fingertips digging into the palm of my hand. In the Lin family, which prided itself on being a family of scholars, I was treated worse than a dog. Yet I never imagined that in this military family, one that everyone went out of their way to avoid, I would actually be treated with respect for the first time in my life. After the formalities were over, I was led into the bridal chamber. The door swung open, and a crisp scent of herbs mingled with a faint, cool fragrance wafted in. The veil was lifted by a jade rui. I looked up and met a pair of eyes as deep and cold as the stars. Gu Yi was not as gaunt as the rumors suggested. His face was slightly pale and had a sickly look to it, but his features were striking, and he stood with his back straight as an arrow, like a peerless divine weapon with its edge blunted. He stared at me intently for a moment, showing no signs of the impropriety one might expect on a wedding night. Instead, he turned and walked over to the table, picked up 2 wooden boxes, and walked back to place them on the bed next to me. This first box contains the ownership certificates and a complete set of keys for all the Marquis's storehouses, estates, and shops. Gu Yi's voice was somewhat hoarse, yet it carried a straightforward, businesslike tone. "Father said that now that you've joined the family, you are the mistress of the household. He's entrusted you with full authority over the management of the Marquis's household affairs. If you'd rather not take on this burden, you may refuse." I was stunned. On our wedding night, hand over everything I own? That kind of trust was so overwhelming it was almost frightening. "This second box," said Gu Yi as he opened it. Inside lay a sharp dagger inlaid with turquoise. "It's for you." I looked at him, puzzled. "The poison in my body hasn't been fully purged yet. The imperial physician has declared that my days may be numbered." He looked into my eyes, his gaze so calm it was as if he were discussing a trivial matter. "The Lin family forced you to take my place as my bride. I know you didn't do it willingly. Keep this knife for your own protection. If you have second thoughts within 3 days of our marriage, you may leave at any time with this knife. I will give you a letter of divorce and will never stand in the way of your future. Should the Lin family dare to cause you trouble, the Marquis' cavalry will raise the Lin family's gates and stand by your side." As I looked at this frail yet proud man standing before me, the tension that had been building inside me ever since my rebirth suddenly snapped. I reached out, slid the dagger back into its case, snapped the lid shut with a click, and then clutched the case full of keys tightly to my chest. "I'm not leaving." I met Gu Yi's slightly startled gaze, my tone firm and unquestionable. "Now that we've shared the wedding wine, I am the heiress of the Marquis of Jinbei's household. I'll take the keys to this mansion. As for the poison in the heir's body, I will certainly find a way to seek out a renowned physician to cure you. From now on, the Gu family is my family." Gu Yi looked at me, and a faint glimmer of something unusual flashed in his eyes. "In this life, I will no longer be a lamb led to the slaughter. The Lin family owes me a blood debt, and I will exact my revenge myself, and the house of the Marquis of Jinbei will be the strongest shield I rely on for the rest of my life." It was the second day of their marriage, just as dawn was breaking. I sat upright in the seat of honor in the main hall of the Marquis' mansion, with the betrothal gift ledger that Banksia had transcribed through the night and the key to the box of matching tokens that Gu Yi had given me last night lying within arm's reach. Because he was feeling weak, Gu Yi had taken his medicine and was still resting in his private chambers. The old Marquis had left early that morning to take roll call at the military camp on the outskirts of the capital. At that moment, in the main hall, stood Zhou Quan, the head steward of the Marquis' household, along with several matron overseers. The way they looked at me, while outwardly respectful, hid a hint of probing and contempt in their eyes. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a concubine's daughter who had been reluctantly sent here as a substitute bride, with no real standing, and thus easy to manipulate. Just then, the doorman came to report that the Lin family had sent an elderly matron to pay a visit to the crown prince's consort. I let out a cold laugh. Their visit was just a pretext. Their real intention was to see how much I'd been tormented in this military commander's mansion, and whether I'd tried to take my own life. Mrs. Wang and her daughter would be overjoyed to hear that I was living a miserable existence. "Let her in," I said calmly as I picked up my teacup. Auntie Lee of the Lin family was Mrs. Wang's right-hand woman. As soon as she walked in, her shrewd, almond-shaped eyes darted around the room, trying to spot any traces of tears or injuries on my face. Unfortunately for her, all she saw was me, sitting in the seat of honor, my makeup flawlessly applied, looking dignified and commanding. "I offer my respects to the Crown Prince's consort," said Matron Lee, curtsying in a perfunctory manner, her smile forced. "The lady is concerned about you and specifically sent this old servant to check on you. Although our family comes from a scholarly background with strict rules, this Marquis' mansion is, after all, a military family. If there are any shortcomings, I hope you'll be a little more forgiving." Between the lines, she was constantly hinting that I had no one to back me up, urging me to keep a low profile and play along. I set down the teacup slowly and deliberately. The porcelain clinked with a crisp sound that echoed distinctly through the spacious main hall. "Auntie Lee, please go back and tell the lady that I am doing well here at the Marquis' residence, and that the Crown Prince and my father-in-law treat me with the utmost kindness." I looked at her with a half-smile. "However, the Lin family seems unworthy of the kindness shown to us by the Marquis' household." Auntie Lee was taken aback. "What does the Crown Prince's consort mean by that?" I slammed the bill that Banksia had copied down onto the table and shouted harshly, "What does this mean?" Half a month ago, the Marquis of Jinbei's household delivered exactly 120 palanquins of betrothal gifts to the Lin family, plus 2 imperial estates on the outskirts of the capital. Yet yesterday, the only items that arrived as part of my dowry were a mere 20 old wooden chests, and even the deeds to the imperial estates have vanished without a trace. Worse still, the 20 cartloads of military-grade pig iron included in the Marquis' dowry were secretly unloaded by the Lin family and have disappeared without a trace. As soon as those words were spoken, not only did Matron Lee turn pale, but even Zhou Quan, the steward of the Ho family estate, who was standing below the dais, also turned pale. "Princess consort, you can't just slander someone out of the blue. That pig iron." Matron Lee stammered, trying to defend herself. "It's all there in black and white on this list." I didn't give her a moment to catch her breath, my words ringing out with conviction. "Those 20 cartloads of raw iron were special military supplies brought back from the northern frontier by the old Marquis. Every single piece bears the Jinbei Army's brand. Embezzling military supplies is punishable by death under the law. Go back and tell Minister Lin and Lady Wang that I'm giving them 3 days to return all the betrothal gifts the Lin family withheld or substituted, along with those 20 cartloads of pig iron, to the Marquis' estate treasury, exactly as they were. If even a single thread is missing 3 days from now, I will personally take this ledger and strike the drum of petitions, asking His Majesty to judge the matter fairly and see how the esteemed Minister of Revenue could have committed such despicable acts as embezzling his son-in-law's dowry and hoarding military supplies." Auntie Lee was so terrified that her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees with a thud. She knew that if this matter were to escalate, not only would the Lin family lose all face, but Minister Lin would also lose his official cap. She scrambled out of the Marquis' mansion and hurried back to the Lin family residence to break the news. After sending the Lin family's people on their way, I turned around, and my piercing gaze fell on Zhou Quan, the head steward. "Steward Zhou, even the Lin family has to go about embezzling betrothal gifts on the sly. Yet you, the chief steward of the Marquis' mansion, have the audacity to do so brazenly." I tossed another copy of the Marquis' household accounts, which I'd been poring over last night, at his feet. Zhou Quan's whole body trembled, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Your Highness, please understand, this old servant has served the Marquis' household diligently for decades. I do not know where I have gone wrong." "Diligent?" I scoffed, pointing to several spots circled in red in the ledger. "Last month, the household allocated a total of 500 taels of silver to the 8 young masters for their monthly allowances and winter clothing. But when I asked my 3rd younger brother and the others yesterday, they said they received less than half their monthly allowance, and their winter clothes were nothing more than a half-hearted effort made with old, worn-out cotton padding. Did those remaining 300 plus tails of silver grow wings and fly away? Cold sweat beaded on Zhou Quan's forehead. Well, prices have skyrocketed these past few days, and cotton is much more expensive than in previous years. Do you take me for some ignorant woman who never sets foot outside the house? I interrupted his evasive excuses. This year's cotton harvest was bountiful, yet market prices didn't rise, they actually fell by 20%. You've taken advantage of the fact that the old Marquis is often at the military camp and the crown prince is convalescing and not managing the household to line your own pockets and skim off the master's allowances. Not only that, but the daily kitchen procurement bills are 30% higher than market prices, and all that silver has gone straight into your pocket, head steward Zhou. Realizing that his scheme had been exposed, Zhou Quan immediately dropped to his knees and began to play the old man's card. Please calm your anger, princess consort. After all, this old servant has watched the crown prince grow up. Even if I have no merits, I've at least put in the hard work. You've only just arrived and don't understand the intricate web of power struggles within this mansion. I don't understand the intricate web of your corruption and abuse of power. But I do understand the rules of the Ho family estate. No sooner had he finished speaking than the curtain of the inner chamber was drawn aside, and Gu Yi, draped in a large cloak, emerged, supported by a servant. Though his face was pale, his eyes were as sharp as those of a hawk. Zhou Quan, what the crown prince's consort says is what I say, Gu Yi said quietly, yet his voice carried an air of unquestionable authority. If you dare to deceive your superiors and conceal the truth within the Marquis' mansion, or skim off your younger brother's allowances, you will have crossed my line. With Gu Yi's backing, I had no further reservations and acted decisively, ordering, guards. Strip Zhou Quan of his steward's robes, flog him 30 times, and immediately sell him into hard labor at the work camp outside the city. The silver he embezzled shall be confiscated from his estate to make up the shortfall in the public treasury. As for the other stewards who participated in lining their own pockets, demote them to third-class laborers to observe their future conduct. The estate's guards immediately stepped forward and dragged Zhou Quan, who looked as if he had just lost his parents, out of the courtyard. A piercing scream rang out across the courtyard, causing the remaining maidservants, who had originally been hoping to witness the spectacle, to turn ashen-faced. They all fell to their knees and bowed their heads, no longer daring to show the slightest disrespect. Gu Yi turned to look at me, and a hint of admiration flashed in his deep eyes, decisive and efficient, with a clear sense of right and wrong. You've handled this well, madam. I met his gaze and smiled faintly. Now that the keys to the home mansion are in my hands, I won't tolerate even a speck of sand. You just focus on getting well, young master. I'll hold the fort for you here in the inner quarters. In my past life, I lived in constant fear and submission, only to meet my end by poison wine. Now that I have become the mistress of this Marquis' household, I intend to assert my authority and ensure that those evil spirits dare not come within a step of me. As for the Lin family, the secret behind those 20 cartloads of raw iron is the real showstopper I'm about to bring to a close. My decisive measures in bringing order to the inner quarters put an end to any thoughts of underestimating me throughout the Marquis' household. However, the open and covert attacks from outside have not ceased. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the ledgers for the shops under my name, my third younger brother Guyun's personal servant stumbled into the courtyard, his face deathly pale. Princess consort, it's terrible. Something has happened to the third young master at the western suburbs riding grounds. I slammed the ledger shut. What's going on? The third young master went to the racetrack today to break in a newly acquired warhorse, but the horse suddenly went wild and nearly trampled the second young master of the Earl of Yongchang's household. The second young master wouldn't let the matter drop. He insisted that the third young master had deliberately tried to harm him. He even summoned the city inspector, claiming that the third young master was of poor character, and threatened to file a joint petition to strip him of his eligibility to take next month's military examinations. The military examination was the culmination of 10 years of arduous training for Gu Yun. If he were to be accused of such a crime, his future prospects would be completely ruined. At this moment, Gu Yegong had just finished administering acupuncture, taken his sedative decoction, and gone to bed, while the old Marquis was still drilling his troops at the military camp. A distant solution is of no use in an urgent situation. Hitch up the carriage, we're heading to the west suburb riding grounds. Without a moment's hesitation, I stood up, grabbed the turquoise-inlaid dagger Guy had given me, selected a dozen or so elite guards from the Marquis' estate, jumped into the carriage, and raced straight out of the city. When I arrived at the racetrack, I could see from a distance that Gu Yun was surrounded by a crowd. His fists were clenched, his eyes red-rimmed. Though he was doing his best to restrain himself from lashing out, he stood with his back straight as a pin, like a trapped lone wolf. Standing across from him was a dandyish young man in fine clothes, none other than the second son of the Earl of Yongchang. He was pointing his finger at Gu Yun's nose and shouting, "Gu San, you're trying to kill someone to silence them just because you're backed by the power of the Marquis' household. As for what happened today, I won't rest until your eligibility for the martial arts examination is revoked." "Shut up." I pulled back the curtain and, flanked by a group of bodyguards, walked slowly into the crowd. My voice was cool and calm, not particularly loud, yet imbued with the dignity of one long accustomed to a position of authority, and it instantly silenced the clamor of the entire hall. Gu Yun turned around and saw me. At first she looked taken aback, then a hint of panic flashed in her eyes. "Sister-in-law, why are you here? A place like this, so seedy and disreputable." I gave him a reassuring look, then walked straight up to the second young master of the Earl of Yongchang's household. My gaze, sharp as a knife, scanned him from head to toe. The Earl's household sure does act high and mighty, daring to accuse the young master of my Marquis' household in broad daylight. "You claim my third younger brother's horse intentionally injured someone. Where's the evidence?" "Evidence?" The second young master sneered, pointing to the black horse not far away, which was tightly bound with ropes and still foaming at the mouth. Everyone saw this beast go wild and go mad. "What more evidence do you need?" Ignoring his shouting, I walked straight toward the black horse. "Watch out, princess consort!" Gu Yun was startled and hurried to stop me. I waved my hand, covered my mouth and nose with a handkerchief, and leaned close to the horse's head. Aside from the pungent, sour smell of sweat, the white foam exhaled from the horse's mouth carried a faint, cloyingly sweet, unfamiliar scent. I sneered inwardly. I'd seen plenty of these tricks involving datura flower powder in my past life. "Where is the groom leading the horse?" I turned and shouted sharply. A timid stable hand was dragged out by the guards, shaking like a leaf. I drew the short sword from my belt and slammed its cold blade against the side of his face. Datura powder was mixed into this horse's feed, causing it to become agitated and restless. But that alone isn't enough to make a battle-hardened warhorse completely lose control. "Go on, lift this horse's left front hoof." The guard immediately stepped forward and forcibly lifted the horse's hoof. I used the tip of my knife to pry away the dirt from between the horseshoes and saw a thick, long iron nail, not driven into the thick horny layer, but deeply embedded in the soft flesh on the inside of the hoof. A collective gasp suddenly rippled through the crowd. No wonder this horse runs like a mad beast. With every step it takes, these iron nails dig deeper into its flesh. It's clear someone is trying to kill both the horse and its rider. I glared coldly at the stable hand, pressing the tip of my sword against his throat. "Speak! Who ordered you to tamper with the horseshoes?" Attempting to murder a noble of the imperial court is a capital offense punishable by the execution of 9 generations of one's family. The stable hand was already feeling guilty, and when I bluffed him like that, he was so scared he wet his pants. He scrambled about frantically and pointed at the second young master of the Earl of Yongchang's mansion. It's the second young master." He gave me 500 taels of silver and said that as long as I ruined third young master Gu's eligibility for the martial arts examination, he'd guarantee me a life of luxury and prosperity for the rest of my days. "You're making baseless accusations." Yongchang's second son turned pale and instinctively tried to run away. "Get him!" I gave the order, and the Ho family's guards pounced on him like wolves and tigers, pinning him firmly to the ground. Seeing that the situation was taking a turn for the worse, the imperial censor hurried forward to smooth things over. I tossed the blood-stained iron nail at his feet and said coldly, "There is both eyewitness testimony and physical evidence for today's events. The Earl of Yongchang's household has falsely accused the young master of our house of the Marquis of Jinde. Our household will certainly seek justice from the Emperor regarding this matter. Take him away." And just like that, I had cleanly and decisively thwarted a treacherous plot against Gu Yun. On the carriage ride back, Gu Yun, a far cry from his usual defiant self, bowed deeply to me with great solemnity. "If you hadn't stepped in today, sister-in-law, my life would have been ruined. I will never forget your great kindness." I smiled and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "We're family, no need for formalities. I'm your sister-in-law, so of course I'll look out for you." After that incident, the way my younger brothers in the Ho family looked at me changed completely, from mere obedience toward their elder brother to genuine respect and admiration. And my feud with the Earl of Yongchang's household is not over yet. When the 3-day deadline expired, the Lin family, fearing I might actually file a formal complaint with the imperial court, returned the withheld gold, silver, and valuables that very night. However, regarding the 20 cartloads of military-grade pig iron, Minister Lin claimed they were too old to locate and offered silver notes of equal value as collateral instead. I put the banknote away, but I knew full well, the Lin family simply couldn't deliver that batch of pig iron, because it was the weaponry they'd prepared for the Prince of Jin's rebellion. As it happens, Lin Jingru's engagement party is taking place in the next few days. And the husband she chose after much deliberation, the one she thought would outshine me, is none other than the heir to the Earl of Yongchang's estate. On the day of the engagement banquet, I appeared in the Lin family's grand hall, radiant in a deep red, wide-sleeved blouse embroidered with gold thread in a cloud pattern and wearing a full set of ruby headpieces. Lin Jingru, dressed in a pink bridal gown, watched as I was escorted in by the Gu family's guards, who treated me like a princess. Sparks of jealousy nearly shot from her eyes. But she had to save face, so she covered her mouth and laughed coyly. "Why did you come alone, little sister?" "Well, I suppose your husband, the Crown Prince's younger brother, is too sick to get out of bed. Life in the Marquis' mansion must be truly hard on you. Unlike me, your elder sister, my future in-laws are the Earl's household, a family of noble lineage stretching back 100 years, with a kind mother-in-law and a husband who dotes on me." Seeing her acting like such a clown, I chuckled softly. Banksia immediately handed me an exquisitely crafted silk-lined box. I opened it in front of all the guests, and inside was a set of gold jewelry inlaid with peacock feathers, worth a fortune. Since my elder sister is celebrating her wedding, it's only natural for her younger sister to prepare a generous gift. This set of peacock feather-inlaid jewelry was actually returned to the Marquis' mansion the other night by someone Mother sent. I thought it looked festive, so I'm passing it on to you. I wish my elder sister and the Earl's household a lifetime of happiness and enduring wealth and prosperity." Lin Jingru and Mrs. Wang's expressions instantly turned grim. The betrothal gifts they had been forced to return now felt like a resounding slap in the face. However, the real drama is yet to come. Just as the engagement banquet was getting underway, and Minister Lin was about to raise his glass to toast the Earl of Yongchang, the main gate of the Lin residence was suddenly and violently kicked open by a group of men with menacing expressions. Leading the group was the owner of the capital's largest underground money-lending operation. Waving a thick stack of IOUs, he strode into the main hall and bellowed at the top of his lungs, "Count Yongchang. What a grand engagement banquet you've thrown. But when are you going to repay the 500,000 taels in high-interest loans you owe our money-lending house?" As soon as those words were spoken, the entire room erupted in an uproar. "What did you say? What do you mean, loan sharking?" Minister Lin's hand holding the wine glass trembled violently, and the wine spilled all over the floor. The moneylender let out a series of cold laughs. "I suppose Minister Lin isn't aware of this? The Earl of Yongchang's estate has long been nothing but an empty shell. That father and son have been living it up, gambling, and consorting with courtesans. They've even mortgaged away the family's ancestral property. That's why they're counting on marrying your eldest daughter, hoping her generous dowry will plug this bottomless pit." "No. This can't be true." Lin Jingru screamed, staring in disbelief at her dashing fiancé. The heir to the Earl of Yongcheng was already cowering under the table, too terrified to even peek out. Seeing this, the creditors rushed forward, smashing things and snatching jewelry to settle their debts. In an instant, the once peaceful engagement banquet turned into a scene of chaos. The women screamed in terror. Minister Lin, overcome with rage, clutched his chest and collapsed. And Mrs. Wang, wailing and screaming, tried to shield Lin Jingru, only to have a creditor yank the golden hairpin from her head. I stood on the highest step of the veranda, watching the chaotic scene with a cold gaze, and raised the cup of light tea in my hand to take a small sip. On such a fine and elegant day, sister, you must take your time and savor it. I casually set the teacup on the railing and turned to leave with Banksia. The Lin family's comeuppance had only just begun. At the palace banquet held to celebrate the emperor's birthday, glass lanterns illuminated the Hall of Supreme Harmony as brightly as daylight. Gu Yi and I sat side by side at the head of the military officers' table. Thanks to my careful care over the past few months and the acupuncture treatments administered by a renowned physician, the poison in his body had been largely neutralized. His once pale face had finally regained some color, and his back stood straight as a pine tree, radiating the unyielding spirit of a son from a military family. After 3 rounds of drinks, just as the singing and dancing were in full swing, a sudden turn of events occurred. The left censor-in-chief of the Board of Censors, serving under the Prince of Jin, suddenly rose from his seat, knelt in the center of the hall, and cried out, "Your servant has a matter to report." I accused the Marquis of Jinbei of amassing a private army, hoarding military-grade cast iron, and plotting treason. The sound of stringed and wind instruments in the main hall came to an abrupt halt, and a deathly silence fell. The old Marquis's expression darkened. Just as he was about to stand up, Gu Yi pressed his hand down from beneath the table. The Prince of Jin immediately stood up, walked to the front of the hall, and looked deeply distressed. "Father, the day before yesterday, in an abandoned mine shaft in the western hills on the outskirts of the capital, your son discovered no fewer than 20 cartloads of military-grade pig iron, all bearing the brand of the Northern Frontier Army. Unless he had long harbored treasonous intentions, why would the Marquis of the Northern Frontier stockpile such a vast quantity of pig iron for casting on the outskirts of the capital?" The emperor's face was as stern as stone, and his piercing gaze swept across the Gu family's seats. The atmosphere in the hall was extremely tense. Just then, my dear father, Lin Yanzong, Minister of Revenue, suddenly scrambled to his feet from among the civil officials, prostrated himself with a thud, and cried out through his tears, "Your Majesty, please see clearly. This humble servant is guilty." I had believed the Gu family to be loyal and righteous, which is why I married my daughter into the Marquis's household. Little did I know that when my daughter returned home, she wept as she told me that the Marquis's household was secretly plotting day and night to forge weapons and harbor treacherous intentions. Though my heart is broken, I dare not let personal feelings override my duty. I humbly beg your Majesty to conduct a thorough investigation into the household of the Marquis of Jinbei. This move, kicking someone when they're down and the pot calling the kettle black, was truly a masterful performance. The Prince of Jin intended to use these 20 cartloads of raw iron nails, bearing the seal of the Northern Frontier Army, to crush the Marquis's mansion. For Lin Yanzong, this presented an opportunity not only to eliminate the Gu family, a formidable power, but also to demonstrate his loyalty to the Prince of Jin and completely clear himself of the charge of embezzling the betrothal gifts. I looked at Lin Yanzong's hypocritical face, which was etched with a look of noble righteousness, then slowly stood up and walked straight to the center of the hall. "Father, you've really put on quite a performance with this sacrificing family for the greater good act." It was truly full of emotion and conviction. I stared at him coldly, my clear voice echoing through the vast hall, ringing out with conviction. "But I, your daughter, cannot understand. Since you had long since sensed these treacherous intentions, why did you go out of your way to accept that exorbitant dowry of 120 palanquins from thee? Why did you even go so far as to secretly hoard those 20 cartloads of military-grade pig iron intended as part of the dowry?" As soon as those words were spoken, the entire room erupted in an uproar. Lin Yanzong's expression suddenly changed. He pointed at me and shouted angrily, "You wretch! What nonsense are you spouting in front of the emperor? That pig iron was clearly hidden by the Gu family in the western mountains. What does it have to do with my Lin family?" Without a hint of haste, I pulled a thick ledger from my sleeve and presented it to the chief eunuch with both hands raised above my head. Your Majesty, these 20 cartloads of raw iron were brought back from the northern frontier by the old Marquis. They followed the Ministry of War's standard reporting procedures and were carried through the Lin family's gates as part of the betrothal gifts. The Ministry of Rights approval document states this clearly: there is absolutely no concealment whatsoever. But on the second day after the wedding, when this humble wife was taking inventory of her dowry, I discovered that these 20 cartloads of raw iron had vanished without a trace. I followed the trail and discovered. I spun around abruptly, my gaze piercing Lin Yanzong and the Prince of Jin like a poison-tipped blade. This shipment of raw iron was secretly transported overnight by Minister Lin to an abandoned waterland transshipment warehouse south of the capital, where it was quietly handed over to a steward of the Prince of Jin's household for the clandestine manufacture of weapons and armor. You're making baseless accusations. The Prince of Jin roared in anger, a fleeting glimpse of undisguised panic flashing in his eyes. Whether I am making baseless accusations or not, Your Majesty will know the truth with a single investigation. I stood my ground, gazing intently at him. The pig iron found in the West Mountain mine was merely a smokescreen, a small batch hastily set aside by His Highness the Prince of Jin to frame the Marquis' household. The real forging workshop is right at the South City transshipment warehouse. I not only have the Marquis' household's betrothal gift list and records of the Lin family's wagon tracks used to transport the pig iron, but I also have sealed letters documenting the secret handoff between the Lin family's steward and an advisor to the Prince of Jin's household. As soon as Lin Yanzong heard the words South City Transport Warehouse and sealed letter, his legs gave way, and he collapsed completely to the ground. The Emperor's expression had grown as dark as could be, and he slammed the evidence I had presented right into Lin Yanzong's face. Where is the commander of the Imperial Guard? Immediately lead your men to surround and raid the South City Transport Warehouse. Search every nook and cranny for everything inside, leave no stone unturned. In less than half an hour, the commander of the Imperial Guard galloped back to the palace. Your Majesty, there is indeed a secret chamber beneath the transport granary south of the city. We have seized 3,000 sets of illegally manufactured armor and weapons, along with hundreds of craftsmen. The head steward of the Lin household and the chief secretary of the Prince of Jin's mansion were supervising the work on site. They have all been arrested, and we have secured both witness testimony and physical evidence. The evidence is irrefutable. There is no room for further excuses. The Prince of Jin's face turned ashen. He fell to his knees with a thud and cried out repeatedly that he was innocent. Meanwhile, Lin Yanzong was so terrified that his whole body was trembling, and he couldn't even utter a complete sentence. What a minister of revenue! What a man who puts the greater good before his own kin! The Emperor, so enraged he could only laugh bitterly, his eyes flashing with murderous intent, said, "You dare to confess even to the capital offenses of stealing military supplies and conspiring with a prince to commit treason. Today, I shall grant your wish. Issue an imperial decree, strip Lin Yanzong of his official cap and feathered plume, execute every member of the Lin family, and imprison him in the celestial prison immediately. Strip the Prince of Jin of his title as a Prince of the Blood, confine him to the Imperial Household Department, and he shall not be permitted to leave without an imperial decree." The palace guards pounced like wolves and tigers, snatching the black official cap from Lin Yanzong's head. He was dragged past me like a dead dog, his clouded eyes filled with fear and disbelief. Even as he died, he could not fathom how that concubine's daughter, who had been bullied at will by the Lin family and forced into a marriage in her place, could have become the merciless demon who cast him into the depths of eternal damnation. I looked down at him from above, a cold smile curving my lips. That cup of poisoned wine that led to the execution of my entire family, in this life, I've poured it right back into your mouths, exactly as it was. Silence returned to the grand hall, and the immense calamity that had loomed over the Marquis of Jinbei's mansion vanished in an instant. Guyi stood up, walked over to me, and, in full view of the entire court, naturally took my hand. His palm was warm and broad, and the thin calluses on his fingertips exuded a reassuring sense of absolute strength. "I apologize for alarming His Majesty and all of you, my lords. Although my wife is a member of the Lin family, she understands the greater good and has put it before her own family, a true blessing for me. Guya's voice rang out clearly as he calmly and steadily shielded me at his side. The Emperor looked at us intently. The gloom on his face lifted, and he sighed. The entire Gu family has shown unwavering loyalty and bravery. I am sorry for the hardships you have endured. I bestow 1,000 taels of gold upon the house of the Marquis of Jinbei. As for Lady Lin, the Crown Prince's consort, for her meritorious service in exposing the rebellion, I confer upon her the title of Lady of the First Rank. Gu Yi and I both expressed our gratitude. As I stepped out of the palace, a cool night breeze blew, and the full moon hung high in the sky. Gu Yi took off the dark-colored fox fur cloak he was wearing and wrapped it tightly around my shoulders, then said in a low voice, "Your move tonight, cutting off the enemy's supply line, was truly heart-stopping. Even I didn't know when you discovered the weak spot in that transit warehouse or how you'd managed to get your hands on the handover letter." I looked up at him, my eyes sparkling. Since the Crown Prince has entrusted me with the entire fortune of the Marquis' household, I certainly won't let anyone slander the Gu family. Whoever tries to climb the ranks by stepping on the Marquis of Jinbei's household will have to face the blade in my hand first. Gu Yidong stared intently at me, his deep eyes brimming with undisguised passion and tenderness. Without saying a single unnecessary word, he simply clasped my hand, our fingers intertwined so tightly it felt as if he were trying to embed me into his very being. In this round, I not only completely destroyed the Lin family, but I also truly won this man's heart. After the Lin family's downfall, a brief period of calm descended upon the capital, but smoke signals suddenly began rising from the border outposts. The Northern D had mustered an army of 300,000 to invade the border, and battle reports poured into the capital like snowflakes. Gu Yi, now free of the remaining toxins in his body, volunteered to lead the campaign. However, undercurrents were swirling within the imperial court. Although the emperor had stripped the Prince of Jin of his title, the prince's loyalists remained. They vigorously recommended the elderly General Zhao, a man who was all talk and no action, as commander-in-chief, effectively forcing Gu Yi into the role of deputy commander. On the eve of my departure, the autumn wind howled. Sitting before the candlestick, I carefully sewed the last of the wound medicine, which stops bleeding and promotes tissue regeneration, into a waterproof oilpaper wrapper. Gu Yi took off his everyday clothes and put on a set of gleaming silver armor. He walked over to my side and watched in silence as I packed his belongings. His deep eyes were filled with 1,000 unspoken words, which finally dissolved into a barely audible sigh. "Now that I'm leaving, the entire burden of the home manor rests on your shoulders alone. General Zhao is stubborn and headstrong. I'm afraid this battle won't be easy." His voice was low and hoarse. I handed him the package filled with first aid supplies, and then, with great solemnity, slipped a silk pouch sealed with gold thread under his chest plate. "My husband, keep this silk pouch close to your body. If General Zhao, in his eagerness for glory, acts rashly and our army becomes bogged down, you must open this pouch." I looked him straight in the eye, my tone more serious than ever before. In my past life, after I died from that cup of poisoned wine at the Lin family's estate, my resentment lingered, and I became a wraith trapped within the Lin family mansion. I once heard with my own ears my father and the Prince of Jin plotting together. In order to completely destroy the foundations of the Marquis of Jinbei's estate, they secretly colluded with the Northern D and revealed the fatal weakness in the northern border defenses. It was an extremely well-hidden, abandoned salt trail that led directly to Blackwind Valley, the only route for the army's supplies. In his previous life, the Northern D had used this very salt trail to launch a surprise attack, setting an ambush in Blackwind Valley and burning the entire supply train to the ground. As a result, the 100,000-strong army nearly suffered total annihilation, and the Gu family sustained particularly heavy casualties. In this lifetime, though the Lin family has been wiped out, the Northern D's treacherous schemes will certainly not change. "Inside this silk pouch lies the key to breaking the deadlock," I said, gripping his icy gauntlet and enunciating each word clearly. "Remember this, no matter how the commander redeploys his troops, you must keep an elite force behind to secretly hold the Blackwind Valley. As long as you hold that position, you'll remain invincible." Gu Yed-ing stared at me intently, but did not ask how a woman of the inner quarters could possibly know such military secrets. He simply wrapped his arms around me from behind and held me tightly. His hard armor pressed painfully against me, but the hot, beating heart within his chest gave me a profound sense of peace. I trust you, he swore solemnly in my ear. Wait for me to return victorious. After the main army set out, I did not sit idly in the Marquis' mansion waiting for news. Before the troops move, provisions must be in place. The logistics and supply operations led by General Zhao were not only rife with extortion at every level but also terribly inefficient. I acted decisively, summoning the managers of all the major trading houses I had taken full control of following the Lin family's downfall, and laid all the cards on the table regarding the Ho family's treasury. Sixth brother. I looked at Gu Xian, the sixth young master, who stood nearby and was well versed in mathematics, and placed a heavy jade token in his hand. Starting today, you will lead a team to fully take over the covert operations of these businesses. Outwardly, we'll keep a low profile, but behind the scenes, we'll break up all the inventory from our cloth shops and rice stores into smaller batches and secretly transport them via caravans to Dingzhou garrison in the northern frontier. I must ensure that the Crown Prince's troops will always have an endless supply of grain and medicine. Gu Xian's eyes sparkled as he took the jade token with both hands and replied in a loud voice, "Don't worry, sister-in-law. As long as I, Gu Xian, am here, I'll never let the soldiers on the front lines fight on an empty stomach." Over the next 2 months, the home mansion was like a finely woven net in my hands, continuously supplying the northern frontier with fresh blood. Everything in the mansion ran like clockwork, and my younger brothers trained diligently. No one dared to slack off even for a moment. It wasn't until the first heavy snowfall of winter that the urgent military report, sent by express mail from the front lines, finally shattered the tranquility of the capital. The imperial court was in an uproar. Just as I had expected, old General Zhao, in his eagerness to claim credit, had acted rashly and fallen into the northern D's trap designed to lure the enemy deep into their territory. Now he was trapped at Luoyan's sand, with his army cut off from water and supplies. The situation was critical. The entire court, both civil and military officials, was in deep mourning, and the emperor, overcome with anxiety, flew into a rage right there in the Golden Hall. But immediately afterward, a second urgent message, a 800-li express, struck like a bolt of lightning. Good news! The Crown Prince of the Marquis of Jinbei has routed the enemy forces. The messenger galloped down Suzaku Avenue, his hoarse yet resonant voice echoing to the heavens. It turned out that just as the Northern D's main force was besieging our commander and had dispatched a 10,000-strong surprise force to attempt a sneak attack on Blackwind Valley, the lifeline of our army, via the abandoned Salt Trail, Guy had already followed the strategy in my silk pouch and ambushed a full 5,000 elite troops on the cliffs flanking Blackwind Valley. As soon as the enemy forces entered the valley, Guy ordered a barrage of boulders and logs to be rolled down, cutting off their retreat, followed by a volley of arrows. In that battle, the Northern D's surprise attack was completely annihilated, leaving not a single soldier alive. Not only that, but Guy turned the tables on his opponent. Taking advantage of the heavy snowfall, he followed the Salt Trail straight into the rear of the Northern D's royal court and set fire to the enemy's granaries. The Northern D army collapsed without a fight, not only lifting the siege of Luoyan Sand but also pushing the defensive line forward by a full 300 li. When the news of victory reached the home mansion, I was holding the dagger that Gu Yelin had left behind before his departure. Hearing the cheers outside the door, my back, which had been tense for months, finally relaxed, and my eyes stung slightly. He won, sister-in-law. Big brother won. Several younger brothers rushed into the courtyard, their faces beaming with joy. I smiled as I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, stood up, and gazed toward the snow-filled sky to the north. I have finally turned the tide of that tragic defeat from my past life, a defeat that claimed the lives of 100,000 loyal souls and destroyed the foundations of the Ho family's estate. Far from dying on his sickbed during our honeymoon, my husband rose to legendary status in a single battle, becoming the most brilliant war god of the Great Xia dynasty. And I, too, have finally, amid the bloodshed and turmoil of this life, firmly taken hold of my own destiny. On the day the army returned in triumph, the capital was decked out in festive red for 10 li, and the people lined the streets cheering. Standing on the high white marble steps of the Marquis' mansion, I could see the white horse galloping far ahead, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Instead of heading to the imperial city for the victory banquet, Guy, still clad in his armor and bearing the marks of the northern land's harsh weather, rode straight back to the Marquis' mansion. He reined in his horse at the bottom of the steps, dismounted, and strode purposefully toward me. Those eyes, once filled with lifelessness and illness, now shone as brightly as stars, sharp yet full of tenderness. "I'm back," he said, coming to a stop in front of me, his voice slightly hoarse from the long journey. I gazed at the dark red bloodstains on his shoulder guards that hadn't been wiped clean yet. A pang of emotion welled up in my nose, and I smiled as I placed my hand on his cold armor. Now that the Crown Prince has kept his promise, I am at ease. Everyone in the Marquis' mansion is well. Guyi could no longer care about propriety or social conventions. Right in front of the people lining the streets and the servants of the Marquis' mansion, he pulled me tightly into his arms. That embrace dispelled all the gloom and fear, and it also made it clear to the world just how irreplaceable I was in his heart. From that day forward, the Marquis of Jinbei's household enjoyed 3 years of prosperity. Over the past 3 years, not only have I managed the estates to the point of unprecedented prosperity, but my younger brothers have also distinguished themselves. My second younger brother has repeatedly distinguished himself in the military and was promoted to the rank of guerrilla general. My third younger brother, Gu Yun, took first place in the martial examinations, becoming the youngest martial champion in the Great Xia dynasty. And my fourth younger brother passed the imperial examinations with flying colors, ranking third overall. For a time, the house of the Marquis of Jinbei was renowned for its excellence in both civil and military affairs, enjoying unparalleled prestige. As for me, I also received the joyful news that I was expecting, and after the imperial physician took my pulse, he stated outright that it was an extremely rare multiple pregnancy. One day, the old Marquis hosted a banquet at his mansion to celebrate his fourth younger brother's success in the imperial examinations. During the banquet, several court officials, who were aligned with the Empress Dowager's faction and had long been at odds with the Gu family, noticed my prominently rounded pregnant belly and began to stir up trouble by sowing discord. Now that the Marquis of Gu holds the reins of power, and the Crown Prince's consort is in the late stages of her pregnancy, it is truly not appropriate for her to take on the burden of serving others. A censor with a goatee stood up, holding a wine cup, his smile forced. As it happens, I have 2 stunning twin sisters from Jiangnan in my household, well-educated and well-mannered. Why not send them to the Marquis' residence to lighten the Crown Prince's consort's burden and ensure the Marquis' lineage continues? Wouldn't that be wonderful? As soon as those words were spoken, the previously lively banquet fell instantly silent. Everyone's gaze drifted subtly toward Gu Yi at the head table. I sat next to Gu Yi, leisurely peeling a grape, without even lifting my eyelids. Suddenly, there was a loud clang. Gu Yi suddenly slammed the wine cup in his hand down hard on the table. The fine roux kiln porcelain shattered on the floor, and the splashing wine drenched the imperial censor from head to toe. "Who do you think you are, daring to meddle in the inner quarters of my Marquis of Jinbei's mansion?" Gu Yi rose slowly to his feet, looking down on the imperial censor with a haughty gaze, his entire being radiating a terrifying killing intent forged in a sea of corpses and blood. "It was my wife who pulled me, Gu Yi, back from the brink of death. The provisions for my army were sent to the northern frontier by my wife, who depleted her entire dowry to do so. The fact that the house of the Marquis of Jinbei has reached this position today is entirely due to my wife's diplomatic efforts." He turned his head and, in full view of the entire court of nobles, clasped my hand tightly. His words rang out with unwavering conviction, his voice as deep and resonant as a great bell. "I, Gu Yi, swear before heaven today that for the rest of my life, Lin Wan shall be my only wife, and I will never take a concubine. Should I break this oath, may heaven and earth destroy me. From now on, anyone who dares to mention the matter of taking a concubine again will be considered a mortal enemy of the Marquis of Jinbei's household, and I, Gu Yi, will not spare them with the battle sword at my waist." The imperial censor turned ashen with fear. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, repeatedly kowtowing and begging for mercy. The entire banquet fell deathly silent. No one dared to provoke this iron-fisted war god again. I clasped Gu Yequan's broad, warm hand, and a wave of warmth washed over me. In my past life, I lived as if walking on thin ice, but in this life, there is someone willing to build an impenetrable wall around me to shield me from all the hardships and trials of life. In the depths of winter, as the snow fell heavily, my due date finally arrived. This pregnancy had been fraught with danger, and the imperial physician had long ago diagnosed it as a set of triplets. On the day of the delivery, the pain was so intense that I nearly fainted on the bed. Ignoring the midwife's warning that bloodshed in the delivery room brings bad luck to male heirs, Guyi kicked the door open and stormed in. With bloodshot eyes, he knelt by the bed, clutching my hand tightly, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Warner, don't give birth. If things don't go well, as long as you're safe, I'd rather not have the children." I bit my lip and, drawing strength from his palm, gave it my all. As 3 loud cries pierced the night sky over the Marquis' mansion, the midwife's voice, filled with both surprise and joy, rang out from within the room. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Congratulations, Crown Prince. The Crown Princess has given birth to 2 young princes and a young princess. Mother and children are safe and sound. This is a sign of great good fortune." The old Marquis stood in the courtyard, tears streaming down his face in his excitement, crying out again and again, "May our ancestors watch over us." Guyi, however, didn't even glance at the child being carried away by the wet nurse. He simply buried his head deep in the crook of my neck, his scalding tears stinging my skin. He kissed my forehead over and over, as if I were a priceless treasure he had lost and then regained. With this victory, I have firmly established myself as the matriarch of the Marquis of the North's household, and no one can shake my position in the slightest. One day after my postpartum confinement period ended, I was reclining on a soft couch in the warm chamber, watching Guy clumsily play with a rattle for the 3 adorable little babies. Banksia lifted the curtain from outside and came in, looking a bit strange. "Madam, there's a crazy woman causing a scene at the back gate. The guards have subdued her. She claims to be your elder sister, Lin Jingru." I paused for a moment as I fiddled with the hand warmer. When the Lin family's estate was confiscated all those years ago, Lin Jingru narrowly escaped execution because she had long been betrothed to the Earl of Yongchang's household. But the Earl of Yongchang's household was nothing more than a shell of a family, deeply in debt. Once the Lin family fell, she lost the security of her dowry, and one can only imagine what her life was like there. "Take the guest out to the side gate. I'll go take a look." I threw on my heavy fox fur coat, picked up the brazier, and walked out. On a secluded stretch of snow lay a woman, her clothes in tatters and her face gaunt. Her face was covered with frostbite and bruises from being beaten. There was not a trace left of the haughty, aloof air of the once privileged legitimate daughter. Hearing footsteps, Lin Jingru jerked her head up and fixed her gaze on the priceless firefox cloak I was wearing, as well as the crowd of respectful servants surrounding me. The jealousy and resentment in her eyes were so intense they seemed on the verge of gushing forth as tangible venom. "How dare you! Lin Wan, you bitch, how dare you live such a good life!" She thrashed about and screamed like a madwoman in the snow. "That was supposed to be my destiny. The position of Crown Princess of the Northern Marquis is mine. The title of Lady of Imperial Decree is mine. I'm the one who should have given birth to triplets and been showered with endless affection. You stole my life." I looked down at her from above, my gaze as if I were looking at a pile of worthless ashes. "Your life?" I let out a cold laugh. My voice rang out particularly crisp and icy in the biting wind. "Back then, it was you who despised Guiyezhong for being mortally wounded, and it was you who coveted the superficial splendor of the Earl of Yongchang's estate. That's why you forced me to take his place as his bride. You wanted boundless wealth and prestige, yet you weren't willing to take even the slightest risk. Now that the Earl's household has fallen, your husband has sold you off as a concubine to pay off his gambling debts. This is the blessing you brought upon yourself." I took a step forward, my gold-embroidered cloud-patterned slippers pressing down on the pristine white snow, untouched by even a speck of dust. "Lin Jingru, never blame others for your own greed and cowardice. The outcome of our lives was already sealed the moment you raised that cup of wine meant to poison me." Lin Jingru froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. It seemed she hadn't grasped the hidden meaning in my words, or perhaps she had been petrified by the bone-chilling cold in my eyes. All she could do was lie face down in the snow in despair, letting out a heart-wrenching whimper. "Close the door." I turned away without giving her another glance. The heavy vermilion gate slowly closed amid her desperate screams, completely sealing off her resentment and regret from the wind and snow. In my past life, I met a tragic death on that cold, hopeless night at the Lin family's home, thereby fulfilling their greed. In this life, I walked proudly into the Marquis of Jinbei's mansion. Not only did I take the lives of those wolves who had devoured me alive in my past life, but I also earned my husband's affection, my brother's respect, and the joy of a household full of children. Inside the warm chamber, the underfloor heating was blazing. When Gui saw me return, he immediately stepped forward to help me take off my chilly cloak and pressed a cup of warm milk tea into my hand. The three little bundles of joy were cooing and blowing bubbles in their cradles, a peaceful, serene moment, a lifetime of tranquility. In this life, I have finally truly grasped the fulfillment that belongs to me. The end.